When I heard the knock on my door in the middle of the night, my breath caught because I knew it was not random. The storm had been gnawing at the roof for what felt like hours, chewing the sky into ragged white flashes and low growls, and then the power died so cleanly it felt like a hand had covered my mouth. The road to my house is just a thin scar on the edge of town, a place people forget until they are lost or desperate. No one comes here by accident. I told myself it was only a traveler. I told myself I would offer a couch and a blanket, and that would be the end of it. I thought that was the whole story, that all I had to do was be kind and then go back to being alone. But the night had already made other plans for me. I opened the door on a gust of rain that had teeth. A man stood there with a child pressed to him, both of them drenched, both of them blinking against the lightning. The little one clutched a thin backpack to her chest like a life preserver, and the man kept one hand on the top of her head as if that could hold the sky in place. He did not push, he did not plead, he just said, softer than the storm, "Please." I could see the tremble starting in the child's jaw, the kind that turns into a full body quake. Fear slid through my ribs, and then something warmer shoved it aside. I stepped back and opened the door wider. They crossed the threshold like people entering a church. Water pooled at their feet. I grabbed towels from the bathroom and held them out, and the man thanked me with a voice that sounded hungry. The child's eyes found mine and did not let go. I am a teacher, and there is a look some children wear when they are testing if the world is safe. Her gaze was not that. It felt older. It felt like someone reading a page they already knew by heart and waiting to see if I would catch the missing lines. We moved through the house by memory because the lamps were blind and the flashlight was somewhere in a drawer that always sticks. I lit a candle with the last match in the book, and its small circle of light made the kitchen feel like a stage. The man stood just outside it, as if afraid of being seen too clearly. The girl stepped straight into the glow and set her backpack on a chair. "Thank you, miss," she said, so polite it hurt. The way she said miss told me she had been taught to make adults feel large and safe. It also made me aware of how small my kitchen really is, how close we all were to each other's breath and secrets. "Sit," I said, and they did, but the man kept his body angled toward the door. There was a long scrape of thunder, and the house seemed to bow to it. I filled a pot from the tap to make tea on the gas stove, and that was when the girl spoke my name. She said it like a bell, soft and sure. I froze with the pot in my hands. I had not told them anything about me. The last of the match smoke still curled in the air. The man's eyes flicked up, quick and sharp, but he said nothing. "How do you know my name?" I asked, and my voice sounded like someone else's voice. The girl just touched her chest with 2 fingers and then pointed toward my hallway, where, on the wall, my class photo hangs in a cheap frame. In the flicker, I could not see it properly, only the dark rectangle and a glint of glass. It was an easy answer, and I almost took it. I almost let it pull the thorn from my thoughts. I almost said, "Of course, of course." The kettle began to hum, a little creature trying to sing over the storm. The man's shoulders loosened a fraction. He looked younger in the candlelight, or maybe more tired, which is the same thing if you look at it long enough. His hands were chapped and raw, the kind of raw that comes from work that does not pay enough. The girl leaned forward with her elbows on her knees, bold as a cat warming its paws, and whispered, "You live alone." It was not a question. It was not unkind either. It landed in me like a hand finding a pulse. I nodded before I knew I was nodding. The truth felt like it had always been in the room, and we were only now acknowledging it. I poured tea into 3 mismatched cups, and the steam caught in my throat. The man finally took a step into the circle of light. His jacket smelled like wet leaves and gasoline. He watched the steam twist and said, "We'll be gone by morning." The words were meant to soothe. They tightened something in me instead. Morning felt so far away, it was almost a rumor. Outside, the wind threw handfuls of rain at the windows. Somewhere down the county road, a dog started up, then another, then silence again, the kind that folds in on itself. I felt the old habit rise in me, the one that says, ask questions, gather facts, make a plan. But the girl had placed her small hand flat on the table, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw a pale line crossing her wrist, like a scar or a mark, and my good, sensible questions turned into a scatter of birds in my head. I blinked, and the mark was gone, or maybe it was only the trick of the candle. "Where are you coming from?" I asked. The man lifted his cup but did not drink. The girl's eyes slid to him, waiting, trusting. He said, "Not far," and I knew he was not lying and also not telling me anything. I should have insisted. I should have sent them back out into the storm or called someone or put boundaries in a neat row like chairs. Instead, I found myself spreading butter on bread with a shaking knife and feeling that strange, steady warmth in my chest, the kind that asks you to be brave in a way you did not plan for. He thanked me again. He said my name this time, and it fit oddly in his mouth, like a word he had practiced in his head before saying aloud. The girl ate like a bird, little torn pieces, careful, grateful. She glanced at the hallway once more, and I felt the hair rise along my arms, because there is more than a class photo down there. There is a door that sticks in damp weather, a door to a room I do not sleep in, a room with boxes I have not opened in years. The storm yanked at the eaves like a stubborn child. The candle licked the air, thin and brave. I wanted to say, "You are safe here." I wanted to say, "I am afraid, but I am with you." What came out was simpler. "You can stay," I said, and my voice did not even wobble. The man closed his eyes like those 3 small words had weight. The girl smiled, and the smile was too knowing for her age. It made my heart try to run and kneel at the same time. He looked at me like he already belonged here, like I was the one being let in. I told myself again that this was all it would be: shelter from rain, toast and tea, a couch that smelled like old books. I told myself morning would come clean and quiet and carry them away. If only I had known what was already moving toward us through the dark, I might have prayed for the storm to last forever. He moved around my kitchen like a shadow learning to be a person, quiet, careful, almost silent. The boy, though, he sat at the edge of the chair with his hands wrapped around the warm cup as if it could teach him how to breathe, and his eyes never stopped. They didn't flit or fidget. They rested on me the way smooth stones rest in a riverbed, as if I were the current passing over them. It wasn't staring to be rude. It was staring like he was trying to line up the truth with the picture in his head. For a second, I felt steady under that look. Then my stomach dropped. It felt like he could see through me and was reading what the storm couldn't shake loose. The man thanked me again and again, but his thanks were made of gauze, thin, trying to cover something bleeding underneath. He kept listening, not to me, not to the kettle, but to the night itself. When the wind shouldered the house, he flinched the way old soldiers flinch at fireworks. He said he would take the couch. He said the boy could sleep anywhere. He didn't say where they had come from or who might be looking for them, and I told myself I didn't need those answers for one night. I decided he might have heard about me from the neighbors, that this was still just kindness, a brief shelter passing through. I thought I knew what this was. I laid a blanket over the back of the couch and found the lantern with the good batteries. The man stood like a guard between the door and the boy kept his eyes locked on mine the way children lock eyes when they are going to ask for something impossible. I gave him bread, and he tore it in exact halves without looking down, like he had practiced fair dividing. He didn't eat right away. He said my name. Not just my last name, my full name, the one that has a middle I never use, the one that only shows up on old forms and my mother's handwriting. He said it clean and certain, It lifted the hair on my arms. "Where did you hear that?" My voice dipped, or rose, I don't know. Something in it changed, and the man heard it. He glanced at the boy, and the glance was a warning and a plea wrapped into one. The boy didn't blink. "You told me," he said, as if we were picking up a conversation we had stepped out of for a moment to fetch tea. "I know," I said, laughing because that's what my body does when it doesn't understand. "I didn't tell you anything." The hallway behind him felt longer than usual, like it had swallowed distance. On the wall, the class photo caught the lantern light and gave me my own face back, lined up with 20 small grins. My full name is not on that frame. It isn't anywhere in this room. I tried to remember if I'd left mail out on the table. I tried to remember what could be seen in the dark that I forgot was visible. Thunder stumbled over the hills. The man cleared his throat. "We're tired," he said softly, like someone might be listening in the rain. "We'll be out by first light." He meant it to calm me. It made the night feel thinner. The boy slid his cup across the table until it touched my hand and held it there, as if returning something I didn't know I'd given. He looked at me like I was the only safe thing left in the world. "Do you know my mother?" I asked the man, too fast, because a thought had risen like a fish, a flash, a guess, a wild thing. "Or anyone in town." He shook his head. He looked at the boy again, a slow look this time, a look that said not yet. The boy let the silence fill up and then said a name no one uses for me anymore. A name I wore when I was small and didn't know how to keep my heart from running into fires. He said it with the same cadence my father used to use on nights when the radio failed and we told stories by candlelight. The kitchen lurched. The chair under me steadied me, or I would have slid to the floor. I went cold down to the wrists. "Who?" I started, then stopped, because the man had stepped closer to the window with his head tilted like a fox catching a scent. Headlights didn't always mean trouble on our road, but tonight they felt like teeth. He raised a finger to his lips. The boy didn't even turn. He had that calm I've seen in a few children right before they do something beyond their years, tying a tourniquet, telling the truth no one else will say. He faced me, unblinking. "The door to the small room sticks when it rains," he said. "You keep your boxes there." My throat closed. "That door is at the end of the hall. It's not a secret," but the way he said it made it sound like a confession. The man shot him another look. "Bed," the man whispered, voice dark with warning. The boy didn't move. He was listening to a different order, and I could feel it humming in the air like the leftover note after a bell. I stood up too quickly and the chair legs scraped the floor. The sound felt loud enough to crack the storm. "You can take the couch," I told the man, hearing my own voice trying to be normal. "He can have the small room. There's a cot." I was aware of my heart in my fingers, in my tongue, everywhere but my chest. The man hesitated. The boy said, "It's where you keep the boxes with the ribbons." And that word snagged in me, ribbons, because those ribbons live in a tin that used to hold cookies, a tin from a Christmas that still smells like pine when you open it. No one knows about it. No one. The man rubbed his brow. The storm stepped back for a breath, and in the pause I could hear the long, wet hiss of the ditch out front. "I'll check the porch," he said, and was gone, the door a slice of night opening and closing. The boy stood. He walked past me down the hallway as if he had lived here once and was only returning to his room. He put his hand on the swollen edge of that sticking door, and it gave under his palm like it knew him. He didn't look back. I should have stopped him. I should have asked for explanations, for papers, for something that would put this on a map I recognized. Instead, I followed the lantern glow and the sound of small, certain feet. I told myself again that he must have heard about me from someone in town, that in a place this small nothing stays private. I told myself that was all this was. If I had known how wrong I was, how that door would open more than a room, I would have braced for a different kind of weather. The storm gathered itself like a fist. The wind shoved at the house from a new angle, and the rain changed sound, harder, closer, meaner. Somewhere down the road a dog barked, then two, then a chorus, the kind that runs yard to yard like a lit fuse. I heard a sharp crack, like a limb giving up, and then a second noise, a heavy dragging somewhere in the dark. The battery lantern put a pale coin of light on the hallway floor, and everything outside that coin felt like it had teeth. The man put his hand on the boy's shoulder just once and looked at me. "I'm going to check the porch," he said. "Lock it behind me." His eyes flicked to the window, to the road, back to me. "If you see lights, don't open." He didn't wait for my answer. He slipped out, and the door took a slice of the storm with it. I turned the deadbolt and heard him move across the boards, light, practiced, and then the creak of the steps, then nothing. The boy stayed with me in the small room where the door sticks when it rains. He stood in the doorway, not crossing the threshold, like he knew the room by memory, and was being careful not to wake it. The smell of damp cardboard and old paper rose up. My heart knew the inventory before my head did. Ribbons in the cookie tin, a stack of letters tied with string and never mailed, the hospital bracelet I can picture without opening anything. He looked at the wall, at the quiet frames, then back at me. He didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. He spoke in a voice that was not loud and not small. "You wrote the date in words because numbers felt too sharp," he said. "You said if you wrote it with numbers you would bleed." The room tilted. I had to touch the doorframe with my fingertips to know which way was down. "What did you say?" The words came out as air more than sound. He stepped in, and the door sighed shut behind him like it had been waiting for that exact wait. "You keep his cap under the ribbons," he went on, simple as reciting the alphabet. "It is not blue like people gave you. It is orange, like the first strip of mourning. Your mother called it a silly color, and you kept it anyway, because the nurse said he had looked good in it when the light hit him. You smelled the cap last winter, and it smelled like tin and pine and the old cookie sugar. You cried into the tin and closed it fast," I heard myself say. "Too fast, too bright. Maybe you heard that from someone. Maybe someone told you the silly parts to make you feel better." I could feel my face trying to smile and my hands shaking, each finger with its own heart. It's a small town. People talk. The dogs outside changed their rhythm, quick, alarmed, and then fell silent all at once, as if a hand had pressed them down. The boy didn't blink. He took one slow step and then another, and the lantern threw his shadow long across the floor. He reached out without looking and set his palm on the dent in the cookie tin lid, an old thumbprint, a circle that matches me and no one else. And he didn't press. He just rested his hand there like you rest a hand on a name at a stone. "You wrote his name twice," he said. "Once in the letter you never sent, once under the picture you never showed. You wrote it with the middle. You never say your middle. You put the letter in the bottom of the box because you thought if it was farther away, the ache would be quieter." My knees went weak, and I sat because my body did what chairs ask of them. I had not said his name out loud in years. I had not said it to another human being ever. I had written it once, then again, then folded the paper so sharply the creases felt like punishment. I opened my mouth to ask how, why, who, and nothing reasonable came out. He looked at me like I was his, not in a way that claimed me, but in a way that understood me. It reached something in me that I keep hidden and touched it without hurting. My eyes burned. Fear and gratitude rose together and knocked against each other until I didn't know which one to hold. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't guessing. He was telling me the weather inside my life like he could feel the drafts. My breath stuttered and then found a slow path. Outside, The man moved past the window, a brief shadow, and the porch boards whispered. A siren tried to be born somewhere far off and failed. The boy put both hands flat on the tin and closed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, like walking on snow. You thought if you stayed quiet long enough, it would stop hurting. You teach everyone's children. You are kind to them all. You go home to the room and say hello and close the door. He knows. I wanted to grab the tin. I wanted to throw it into the storm. I wanted to hold it like a baby. All those wants crashed and tangled. Stop, I said, because there was nothing else to say, and he did, like he had been waiting for me to draw the line. He lifted his hands. He opened his eyes. In them was no pity. There was something else, something I did not have a word for and did not deserve. I told myself it was a coincidence, I said out loud, to make it real. You could have guessed. People can guess more than you think. I stood then, angry at my own shaking, and reached for the tin to prove it to myself, to show him it was empty, or different, or something that would bring me back into my own skin. My fingers found the lid, and the dent met my thumb, and I knew before I opened it what was inside and where it sat, like always, the ribbon, the cap, the bracelet, the letter under everything. He watched me without flinching. Another crack split the night. Closer, wood against wood or wood against ground, and I felt the house listen. They're coming, he said calmly. Not for you, for him. He tilted his head as if hearing a bell that had not rung yet. When you hear it, you'll have to choose. He spoke like choosing was simple. He spoke like he had seen me do it before. I clutched the tin to my chest and felt the cold through the metal and the warm through my sweater. Somewhere in the dark, the dogs began again, but softer now, like they were confused. I wanted to tell the man to get back inside. I wanted to ask the boy who taught him my life. I wanted to say his name and hear how it sounded in this house. Instead, I stood in the doorway of the small room and let the storm count the seconds between flash and thunder, and I waited for something I could not name to arrive. He came back with the storm on his jacket and a look I recognized from fire drills, the one adults wear when they need you calm because they are not. He slipped inside, pushed the door with his heel, and put his palm flat against the wood until the latch clicked. Don't ask, he said, breath thin, eyes thinner. Please, not yet. He checked the window without moving the curtain, the way people who have been watched learn to look. Somewhere down the road, a chain clinked, and a dog's bark broke and stuttered into silence. The wind shoved the eaves and rain hissed in the gutters like a warning too late to hear. He saw the tin in my arms. The way his face changed, it wasn't surprise, not exactly. It was like he had been waiting to see what I would choose to hold. Lights off, he whispered, and I turned the lantern down until the room unclenched into shadow. He stood very still, listening. 2 trucks at the crossroads, he said. Maybe 3. Dogs. He swallowed. They're quartering the fields. He did not say who they were. He did not say why dogs, why trucks, why my road. My throat tightened on questions. Who are you? Who is he? What did you bring to my door? The words crowded but would not pass because the boy had stepped between us, and now he was touching my sleeve with a small, sure hand. He was dry from the towel and warm from the tea, and he smelled like rain-soaked wool and something clean, like laundry dried by wind. He looked up, and his eyes were steady and old and ablaze with something I didn't know how to carry. Without warning, he pressed himself against me, a fast, fierce hug that knocked a sound out of me I didn't know I was keeping, and he said into my sweater, clear as a bell rung close to your chest, "You will save us!" The words cracked me like ice under a heel. My arms closed around him because they knew the shape of a child before my head did. Fear and something like worship rose together, hot and cold at once. and I could feel my heart trying to crawl forward and hide backward in the same beat. I looked at the man over the boy's head, and he looked back, and in his face I saw shame and relief and ruthless focus. He did not pry the boy off me. He nodded once, as if some test had been passed, and then he went to the kitchen in the dark as if he'd learned the layout by listening to my breath. "Put this on," I said somehow to both of them, and found the box of donations I never made it to town with. A sweater, too big, a flannel, missing a button, socks rolled into uneven pairs. The man took only the socks. He moved like someone keeping inventory of every sound his clothing made. He kept glancing at the door as if the door might answer a question. The boy stayed right at my side, hand still wrapped in my sleeve, anchor and plea. "Tell me his name," I whispered, and the man shook his head. "Not yet," he said again, and it landed different this time, less like refusal, more like a promise that scared me. "If they knock—" He stopped, listening. The night breathed. "If they knock, you're alone." He met my eyes, and I saw the thin edge of something like apology cut through the rest. "We shouldn't have come," he said, "but we had to." He called the boy a name I didn't recognize, and the boy didn't move until I moved. Then he moved where I put him, which was worse somehow, because it meant he trusted me more than the man, or because it meant he knew I would do what he asked without understanding. I led them to the pantry, deeper, away from windows. The house made the old soft noises it makes when it's being kind. I felt the weight of the tin in my arms and put it down because I could not hold it and the boy at once. "Tell me who is out there," I said, trying to make my voice crisp, something you can fold and stack. "Tell me if I am hiding you from police or from men who think they are." He rubbed his brow like he had a headache shaped like the truth. "Later," he said, "please." He touched the jamb above the pantry door, and his eyes flicked to the pencil marks there, faint notches where I once measured other people's children, and once, foolishly, nothing at all. The boy saw where he looked, and he looked there too, and I could feel him thinking, the shape of his thoughts like the shape of his small hand. Another sound came, a whine, not a siren, a spotlight spinning slow across the cloud belly, a different brightness crossing our windows. The man stiffened. The boy leaned into me so hard I swayed. "They'll pass," the man rasped, trying to convince the air. "The road's washed at the bend. They won't risk it." He said it like someone who knows where fear chooses to stop and where it doesn't. I wanted to ask if the boy was his. The question burned my tongue. The boy beat me to it in a sideways way. "He is tired," the boy said, almost to himself, and looked up at me like I could fix the world by saying yes. I touched his hair, and my hand shook. He did not seem surprised by my shaking. He tilted his head, listening to something under the storm, and in the same calm voice that had already taken me apart once tonight, he said, "When the knock comes, say the words you wrote and never said." He was not guessing. He was handing me a rope across a river I had never dared to step in. The man drew in a breath like he wanted to tell me everything, and then let it out like he couldn't. "If anyone asks, you don't know us," he said. "You never saw us." He looked at the boy, then at me. "But if the other one comes—" He stopped. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The dogs started up again, farther off now, then near, then gone, their bark slipping like wet stones. I touched the pantry shelf with my fingertips so I would know it was real. "I thought you were just running from bad luck," I said. The words sounded small and foolish in the dark. The boy's hand tightened, and the man looked at me like there were still miles of night left to cross. I told myself this was still simple. A storm, a couch, a door that locks. I told myself they were only running from trouble, and I was only offering shelter. I decided it could end that way if I wanted it to. I decided that and held it like a match in the wind. I thought they were just running from trouble. By morning, the storm had lost its words and kept only its breath. The power was still out. My phone shivered with a handful of battery and a stack of messages, neighbors, the store, the church thread, little dots of town chatter blinking alive even without lights. Anyone see a man in a dark jacket? 2 figures by the creek. Sheriff says, stay inside. Dogs spooked all night. Somebody's hunting something. Rumor moves faster than weather here. It finds cracks and pours through. I stood at the kitchen sink and watched the road turn back into a road. The ditches were full and talking to themselves. The man hovered just out of sight, made of edges, and listening. The boy sat on the pantry stool with his hands on his knees like a student waiting for the bell. I kept feeling like I should be doing something. Lesson plans, laundry, logic. But fear kept rearranging my lists. If anyone learned I'd opened my door, there would be questions, and the kind they ask when they've already decided their answers. I could feel trouble rubbing its hands together, warming itself by my nervousness. They'll ask, the man said, eyes on the window. They always ask after a storm. He didn't say who they were. He didn't need to. In a town this size, they is whoever is louder that day. We'll go when the road is clear. The boy looked up at me like he'd just remembered something simple. At noon, he said, a red truck with a dent on the left will stop. 2 men. One will smile too much. One won't look at your eyes. They'll ask if you've seen us. He said it like a weather report. Then he added, quiet as a spoon on a saucer, you will say, I haven't had company all week. You will say it slow. I felt the small hairs spark along my arms. How do you know that? I asked, before I could help it. He tipped his head, listening to a future I couldn't hear. Because it will happen, he said, as plain as dark. The man didn't argue. He closed his mouth on whatever he wanted to say and checked the back door instead. I made toast because my hands needed instructions. The butter tore the bread. The boy ate tidy halves and watched my face more than the food. Move your car, he said suddenly, not dramatic, just certain. Not under the big elm. Before the sun goes down, it will fall. The elm has stood since my grandfather, I said, but my words were already walking toward my keys. Some part of me was going to do what this child asked, even if the rest of me made jokes about it. He slid off the stool and came with me to the porch. The air smelled rinsed and raw. The elm hunched over the front fence, wet and heavy, and for the first time I saw the dark seam twisting through it like a scar that had never healed right. I moved the car anyway, gravel popping under the tires, and felt ridiculous, relieved, both. At 11, an ATV rolled by slow. At 11 and a little, the church lady's text thread spun sugar into something sharper. Heard he hit someone with that truck months back. Heard he took a kid. Heard he's not right in the head. And none of it had weight, and yet it all pressed. I kept thinking of my job, my classroom, the way parents look at you when they hand you their children each morning like you're a lighthouse you built yourself. I kept thinking of the superintendent's voice and the board and how fast a story can cost you a life you spent years building. My stomach hurt like I'd swallowed a bell. Noon came carrying itself. The red truck had a dent on the left, like the boy said, low and sharp, the kind you don't bother fixing if you think you deserve it. 2 men got out. One smiled too much. One kept his eyes at my shoulder. I stood in the doorway and held the knob like a spine. Smile said they were doing a sweep for everyone's safety. Shoulder Eyes said names and numbers and looked at my mailbox like it had lied to him once. The boy was behind the pantry door, holding his own breath still. The man was somewhere I could not hear, made of silence. Seen anyone pass through? Smile asked, head tilted, and I felt the words the boy had given me rise up from the place where truth comes from. "I haven't had company all week," I said, slow, like he told me to, and the sentence felt like it fit inside me and held me upright. Smile repeated my words back to me with too many teeth. Shoulder eyes scanned the ditch, the path, the windows. "Road's rough," I added. "Tiny, stupid." Smile said it would be better by evening. Shoulder eyes watched the elm like it owed him money. They left dust and a promise to circle back. My knees went soft after the tailgate disappeared. I shut the door and leaned my forehead against the wood and laughed once without humor. The boy stepped out and touched my elbow like a nurse finding a vein. He didn't gloat. He didn't even say, "I told you." He just looked at me like I'd kept a vow I hadn't known I made. He looked at me like I was home. The afternoon sagged under the weight of soaked branches. The man dozed with one shoe on, one off, as if sleep might ask him to run. We spoke in gestures. I set water to boil. He shook his head. The boy took the dictionary off my shelf and leafed it like a storybook, stopping on words he liked the shape of. "Mercy," he whispered, as if tasting it. "Shelter." He touched oak, and then after. We were standing in the front room when the air went strange, the quiet kind of loud, the pause between warning and blow. The boy lifted his head like a deer, like something wild that hears a storm before it forms. "Back," he said, not loud, just aimed, and he took my sleeve and pulled, and I let a child move me because every part of me believed him. We stepped away from the window, just 3 paces, just enough, and the elm tore itself open with a sound like a house crying. The trunk split along that dark seam and came down exactly where I had been standing, glass exploding into music. The front fence flattened like it had knelt. The floor jumped under my feet. The man was there in a breath, his arm across both of us before the leaves even settled. I couldn't hear for a moment. The world came back in pieces, the tick of cooling, the whisper of rain on new leaves, the high breath of someone who had been holding it too long. The boy's fingers were still around my sleeve. He didn't tremble. He just watched the leaves shiver and then go still, as if he had known this exact shape of ruin and had been waiting to step around it. If your heart just stuttered because you felt that pull, the way something impossible brushes your life and changes its weight, then you understand me. Subscribe. I tell the truth about what the world does when no one is looking and nature's quiet laws that save us when we think we're alone. My hands shook long after the floor stopped. Coincidence, I said to myself, like medicine. Old tree, too much water, a bad seam in the heartwood. I said it and tried to believe I believed it. But the boy looked at me with that same steady knowing, and the man stared at the red truck's tire tracks fading on my road, and the wind slipped through the new hole in my house and carried in a smell that wasn't just rain. I told myself it was chance. I told myself that and clung to it like a branch. I decided it could still be simple. We spent the morning sweeping glass into a dustpan and pretending we weren't counting the minutes. The house smelled like sap and wet plaster. Leaves kept falling through the broken window as if the elm were still trying to come inside. The man worked with the quiet of someone who has learned not to waste noise. When we had a path cleared and the worst of the shards taken up, he set the broom down and finally looked at me full on, like a doctor who has decided he can't soften the truth any longer. "They're not law," he said. "Not the ones who matter. They won't arrest us. They'll keep him. They'll keep him because people pay for certainty, and those men serve the ones with money and fear." His voice wasn't angry. It was tired, like a road with too many boot prints. "We're running because they hunt the boy. They have since he was small." The room tilted a little, as if the house itself had to shift to make space for those words. I had already watched him say what would happen, and then watch it happen. Still, hearing it set like that made something in me crack and rearrange. You mean they think he... I couldn't finish the sentence. The man nodded once, a small, bleak gesture. He sees, he said. He knows, not always, not everything. Enough. He rubbed the heel of his hand over his eyes. I was supposed to deliver him. Papers said evaluation. That was a lie. I took him instead. Are you his father? I asked. The question felt like it would burn my tongue if I held it any longer. He stared at the broken window and didn't answer. After a beat, he said, I promised his mother. That's the piece I can tell you now. He looked smaller when he said it, and somehow larger too, like the truth had stripped him and dressed him all at once. I sat because my knees were learning new rules. My job, my classroom, the steady river of children who trust me with their mornings. I could feel all of it shifting like furniture on a loose floorboard. There was no way to go back to the night before, to the person who thought help could be a couch and tea. My life had opened, and there is no closing a thing like that. The boy had been quiet, winding a strip of gauze around a splinter in my palm with the care of a student working a science experiment. He tied the knot like a sailor, neat and sure. When the man finished speaking, the boy lifted his face and looked at me the way a lantern looks at the person who lights it. There was such a plea in his eyes that I nearly cried. He didn't whisper this time. He said it like a vow and a simple fact. You are needed, not only by us, by the whole town. The words landed in my chest and made more room than my ribs could hold. Fear surged, hot, electric, and right beside it rose something like worship, a stunned gratitude that I had been chosen for a task I did not understand. It made me want to run and kneel in the same breath. Needed how? I asked, because my teacher's brain still thought in verbs and checklists even while the ground gave way. He looked toward the creek. Before dusk the water will chew through the bank by the old culvert, he said. The bridge will look fine. It is not fine. A bus will cross at morning if you do nothing. He glanced at my bandaged hand, as if to be gentle. You will tell them to close the road. They will argue. Say the words you use on parents when you know better than they do. My mouth went dry. I could see the bridge as clearly as if I were standing there. The soft, undercut earth, the false, smooth top, the way the school bus noses out early when the driver thinks he can beat the morning traffic to town. We can call the sheriff, I said. The man shook his head, not harsh, just certain. He's already been told different, he said. He'll say it's stable. He'll say it costs money to close a road. You know the mothers. You know the drivers. You can make them listen faster than a badge can. I thought of the bus, yellow as corn, full of faces that say my name in hallways. I thought of how the elm had fallen exactly when and where the boy said it would. I thought of the red truck and the smile that didn't reach eyes. Everything in me wanted to say no, to hand this weight back to whatever sky dropped it. Instead, I picked up my phone with its thin line of battery and thumbed open the church thread, the school thread, the neighbor thread. I typed what I knew I could type without sounding mad. Creek bank is soft by the culvert. Please keep kids off the bridge and park away from the bend. It was not enough. It was all I could make myself send. The man watched me with an expression I couldn't name. Respect, maybe, or worry shaped like respect. There's more, he said, and I wanted to cover my ears. He didn't push. Not now. He touched the sill, then the nail heads along the frame, counting without numbers, like he kept track of time in the language of boards. By dark, we need to be gone. Gone where? I asked. There isn't a safe place. My voice was thin and I hated it. The boy took my hand again and squeezed. Small bones, great certainty. There is, he said. The old canning shed by the field with the scarecrow. We will wait there until the other one comes. He dropped my hand and looked down, almost shy. "He will be thirsty. Give him water first." I almost laughed. The canning shed hasn't been used since my grandmother put up peaches in jars that catch the light like treasure. The scarecrow is more rag than man, and the other one, that phrase I had been trying not to look at too closely since the man said it in the night, hung in the air like a note still ringing after the song is done. "You are scaring me," I said, and I meant it, and I also meant, stop telling me what is, and tell me how to be brave inside it. The boy's face changed, not to apology, not to triumph, but to something tender and strong that I do not have a word for. "I am telling you what is so you can be who you already are," he said. He looked out toward the road where rumor runs faster than rain. "They will say you helped a stranger. They will say you chose wrong. But if you close the bridge, nothing will fall that should not." I told myself he was only trying to frighten me into cooperation. I told myself he was a clever child, and the man was desperate, and they were weaving a net out of fear. I told myself that, and held the broom like a weapon, like a scepter, like anything that could make sense of the room. I decided, for one stubborn moment, that he was only trying to scare me. By late afternoon, the sky had the washed-out look of a bruise healing, but the town had only just started to hurt. The group threads lit up in a kind of staccato panic. Names, ages, last seen, the path by the creek, the shortcut behind the feed store. People texted pictures that didn't help and certainty that didn't exist. I could hear shouts on the road like prayer without words, the holler passing person to person, pitch climbing until the dogs took it and ran. Someone banged on my door and then didn't wait for me to answer, already moving on to the next porch. Rumor ran ahead of them all. 2 kids missing since morning. They'd been near the culvert. The culvert I already couldn't stop seeing when I closed my eyes. I stood in my kitchen and felt the floor tilt the way it does when you learn a new rule about the world, and it rearranges the furniture in your head. If anyone decided I'd sheltered a stranger, I'd be next on their list. The woman on the edge of town who minds her own business so well it must be hiding something. I could hear how it would sound said aloud by a mouth that didn't love me. She kept a man here. She kept a boy. She closed her curtains and thought that made it fine. Shame and defiance burned in me like twin wires. The man watched the road with the stillness of someone who knows what movement costs. He didn't touch the curtain. He didn't breathe loud. The boy sat at the table, calm as a lake under wind, thumbing the edge of my old reader, the one with paper soft from 1,000 hands. I had called him she in my head that first hour, the candlelight and the coat and my own assumptions playing tricks. He never corrected me. Now his quiet had a shape I recognized. Readiness. "They're looking for me and not me," he said, not asking, not boasting, just setting words down like tools. "They'll say 2 boys are gone. They'll find the younger under the lip of the culvert, where the bank pretends to be strong. They'll walk right past if no one bends." My mouth went dry. "How do you—" I started, and he cut a glance at the man that said, "Tell her," without speaking. The man rubbed his brow with the heel of his hand and then let his palm fall, empty. "He doesn't guess," he said. "He knows, and some days we get to stand where that knowing can help. Today is one." He looked at me hard, then softer. "If you go, you can turn them. You can make them look where the ground is lying." I could feel the town outside, all its heat and worry, and I could feel the cold place inside me where fear sits and calls itself good sense. I picked up my keys. "If they ask why you're here," I started. He shook his head. "We won't be when you come back," he said. "We'll meet at the shed. If that scares you, be scared later. Go now." I got as far as the porch, and then the boy's voice pulled me back like a hand on my collar. "Wait," he said. He slipped off the chair and came to me with that sure step of his. "You should see, so you'll know what to say when they say it isn't true." He pushed back his sleeve. On the inside of his wrist, low and pale, lay a scar I had half thought I'd imagined the night before, a small, faint star with 8 uneven points, like a child's drawing caught in skin. It wasn't just the shape. It was the way it looked familiar in a place that made no sense for familiarity. I had seen that star in the margins of the old county reader he'd been holding, inked by a teacher long dead beside a woodcut of a flood, and a story about the year the river walked down Main Street. The caption had been half faded, but the old pen had added a note you could read if you tilted the page just so, the mark of those who hear water. I hadn't thought of that in years. I had forgotten how, as a student, I'd traced that star and made a wish like the book was a wishing well, and in a box in the small room, under ribbons and paper and grief, I had once drawn that same star on a folded page and then hidden it from myself. I reached out before I knew I had moved. My fingertips hovered over his skin, not touching, and I felt like I'd stepped into a church I didn't know I believed in. The boy didn't flinch. He let me look the way you let someone hold a light to the thing you have carried in the dark. "It was there when I came," he said simply. "They think it belongs to them. It doesn't. It means I belong to the river and to whoever listens." He searched my face, making sure I heard him. "And you listen." My throat closed. I wanted to laugh at myself for remembering a scribble in a book like it was scripture. I wanted to cry because it felt like scripture, like a line meant for me that I had walked past 17 times a year for 10 years and only now read in my own language. I nodded because words would have broken if I tried to stack them. I ran. The road was mud, the color of coffee, and the ditches chewed loud. At the bend where the willows rake the air, I found the search party knotted into a debate that sounded like panic dressed up as plan. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. "Down," I said, pointing to the shadow where the creek had bitten under the culvert. "On your knees. Reach. Don't jump." I said it in the voice I use when a kid is about to touch the stove. They obeyed because they know that voice, and because some part of them was ready to be told what to do by someone who wasn't afraid of them. A woman laid down flat and slid her arm into the dark and made a sound I'll hear when I am old. A small shoe appeared, then a calf, then a boy, muddy and shocked and alive. The younger one was found exactly where the boy said, curled like a seed, water licking his shoes. No one asked how I knew, not then. They cheered and cried and stamped their feet to remind their bodies they still knew how to be warm. I stood with my hands on my knees and tried to keep the world from tipping. Behind the noise, I could hear the creek talking, hungry still. The older boy wasn't there. Men spread, calling, and the wind carried their voices out of reach. I told myself the mark on his wrist and the note in that book were just a trick of memory, a neat story my mind had pasted over a scared child to make sense of him. I told myself that star could mean anything. I told myself it was only a coincidence. Night gathered like a crowd. By dusk, the road was a ribbon of flashlights and voices, the kind that carry names as if names could pull a person home. I could hear the sheriff's truck idle, the low thrum like a warning that didn't know who it was for. People stood in knots at the bend, hands in pockets, breath white in the cooling air, and rumor stitched them together. The stranger with the boy, the teacher on the edge of town, the window blown out by a tree that somehow fell exactly where it shouldn't. They weren't just hunting for the missing anymore. They were hunting for an answer that would let them sleep. They hammered on my door in 2s and 3s, neighbors with good intentions that felt like hammers anyway. "You seen him? Heard anything? You'd tell us if you knew, wouldn't you?" Their faces were lined with worry and something harder, a righteousness that looked a lot like fear in a different coat. I said the words I had to say, slow and even, the same ones the boy had handed me like a key. I haven't had company all week. I repeated them until they sounded like a prayer I didn't believe in and still needed. Behind the door, the man stood in the dark, an outline with teeth gritted, counting footsteps, counting breath. The boy sat at my table with his hands folded like he was waiting to bless the meal. Calm, 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 as if the night were a page he had already read. Every time the voices swelled, he looked at me, not at the door, as if whatever choice mattered was going to happen in my eyes, not on my porch. "They're calling a sweep by the field," the man murmured. "We need to move." His voice had the steadiness of a breaking branch. He motioned toward the back, the path through the lilacs, the gap in the fence, the strip of grass that knows my footsteps. The shed. I nodded before the part of me that loves rules could object. I grabbed a jar and filled it at the tap until the water sang thin against glass. "For the other one," I heard myself say, and my own voice startled me. The boy's mouth tipped in a quiet smile that wasn't a child's and wasn't not. He slid off the chair and came to me with that sure, soft step. He was little, and he was ancient, and, God help me, I believed him. We slipped out the back, the door whispering shut as if we were leaving a sleeping house. The lilacs brushed our sleeves with their sweet old hands. The field was a black sheet, the scarecrow a darker stitch at its center. Flashlights crossed and recrossed at the far end, like minnows in a fast stream. The man moved in the shallow places of sound, his palm out behind him, not touching, guiding. The boy walked where my feet landed, as if stepping in my prints could make him invisible. At the canning shed, the door gave at my push with that old, familiar sigh, the one that says you've come back to what you didn't finish. The air inside smelled like dust and peaches gone to memory. The shelves held empty jars that caught what little light there was and made it precious. We stood in that small silver quiet and listened to the field breathe. "Now what?" I whispered, because whispering felt like respect. The man was answering when the boy shook his head, just once, like a bird listening to ground. "Wait," the boy said. "He will come to the door and not knock. He will be thirsty." He put 2 fingers on the jar in my hands like a blessing. "Give him this first." Minutes stretched thin. The voices drifted and returned, nearer than far. A beam of light slid along the shed seam and moved on, unsatisfied. The man counted more things with his ears. How many feet, how fast, which direction, but the boy didn't count. He knew. And then the knowing became a person, a scrape, a stumble, a little body breathing like a bellows, and a shadow at the door that didn't lift a hand. I eased the door open. A boy stood there on bare feet, mud to his knees, eyes wide with the shock of still being in the world. He was older than the one we had pulled from the culvert, older and thinner and shaking without making a sound. He looked at me like I was the last solid thing left. I pressed the jar into his hands and said the first word that came, "Drink." He did, greedily, gratefully, water running down his chin and into the raw hollows at his collarbones. The man's shoulders dropped, the kind of drop that releases a prayer without saying it. We could hear the searchers coming back around, the cadence of a group trying to make a plan out of fear. The man's face changed, resolve sharpening like a knife on a stone. "We can't stay," he said. He looked at me, really looked, and in his eyes I saw 100 roads and none of them easy. "If you keep us, they'll break you to get to him. If you send us, they'll call you a liar. There isn't a choice that doesn't cost." The older boy clutched the jar like a relic and stared up at the scarecrow through the open slat, at its lopsided hat, giving the night a foolish grin. He started to cry without sound, tears sliding clean tracks through the dirt. I wanted to gather all of them and build a wall with my body. I wanted to open my mouth and have the exact right words fall out like stones on a path. I had nothing but the truth I could hold. "Go," I said, and it broke me to say it. "Go now." The boy, my boy, the one with the star and the calm, stepped close enough that I could feel the heat of his breath on my cheek. He put his arms around me the way a child does when he decides you are home and there is nothing you can do about it. He whispered into the cup of my ear, so soft and so certain that the words fit inside me like they had always been there. "I will come back, and then everyone will know the truth." Fear and awe rose like twin tides and met in my throat. I held him too tight and let him go. The man touched my sleeve, quick, grateful, asking forgiveness for all the ways this hurt. Then they were part of the night again, two shadows drawing a line toward the woods, a smaller shadow between them staggering but upright, the jar catching a fringe of starlight like a promise. I watched until the dark swallowed them. Voices spiraled closer. A beam of light swept the shed and paused, suspicious at the open door and the smell of water. I stepped out to meet it with my heart held steady by the echo of a whisper. I told myself that was the last of them, that the night had taken back what it lent. I told myself I'd never see them again. Time didn't heal anything. It just made the story quieter on the outside. Weeks went by. The window was fixed. The elm lay in pieces at the curb like a body cut into logs. The culvert got sandbags and caution tape and 3 different opinions. The church lady stopped asking me to bring pies and started watching my hands when I paid in cash. Parents picked their kids up from my class with smiles that showed gums. The board called me in to touch base. The sheriff stopped by twice and asked the same question slower. I said, "I haven't had company all week," until the sentence felt like a stone I rolled in my mouth to keep from choking. It didn't matter. The town doesn't need proof when a story feels true. It needs a face to point at. Mine was easy to find. I told myself I would forget the way the boy hugged me, the way his whisper fit inside my ear like it belonged there. I told myself I would wake into the old life because the old life wanted me back. It didn't. It stood where it always stood and looked different. Then the rain came again, not like the first storm, meaner, lower. The creek talked all night like it had an audience. By morning, the bus was canceled and the town gathered without being told. We met at the lot by the feed store because that's where people go when they don't know where to go. Men in caps, women in work boots, teenagers with their phones up like they could film a way out. The sheriff was there with his hat off, which is how you know a man is worried. The red truck with the dent rolled up late and idled like it owned the air. I was thinking I should leave before anybody remembered to ask me to. That was when I saw him. He didn't come walking up the road. He was just suddenly there on the edge of the lot, skinny in a clean shirt that wasn't his, hair damp, calm like the eye of a storm. Next to him stood the man, older by years or days. I couldn't tell, and he carried something in him that looked like a decision already made. A few heads turned the way wheat turns when a breeze touches only one row. The boy looked at me, not the sheriff, not the men by the dented truck. Me. I felt my knees forget their job. He lifted his wrist. The pale star was there, 8 crooked points, the mark I had traced in a dead teacher's book when I was young and foolish. My breath stuttered. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. He walked to the center of the lot like a bell, walking to its own ringing. The murmur around us thickened. Someone said, "That's him." Someone said my name with sugar on it. He stopped in front of the sheriff and spoke in that steady way that makes you forget your questions. "You need to close the old bridge," he said. "Not at noon. Now the bank under the north side is hollow. The ground will give before sunset." The sheriff looked past him at the men by the truck, at the sky, at the feed store owner like he might find an answer there. "Son," he said, careful, public. We had the county out. They said it'll hold. The boy shook his head once. He bent, picked up a length of rebar someone had left leaning against a post, and handed it to the sheriff. Hit the ground on the north side, he said. Not on top. Under. You'll hear the hollow. A laugh started somewhere and died. The sheriff stood there holding the rebar like a strange kind of truth. He looked at me just once, and I nodded without meaning to. He walked to the bridge with the whole town moving in a slow herd behind him. The boy kept pace at his side, not touching, and the man followed with the quiet focus of someone stepping through a minefield he has mapped in his head. At the north side, the sheriff leaned out over the guardrail and stabbed the rebar into the bank where the grass still looked smug. He did it once, and the sound came back solid. He did it again, lower, and the note changed. Hollow, sick, the kind of sound your chest makes when grief hits you with both hands. People shifted. The red truck men didn't smile. The sheriff went pale under his day's beard and did it once more, and this time the ground collapsed where the rebar bit, the skin of earth breaking to show the soft rot underneath. A few stones slid. A clump of grass let go. You could feel the bridge realize it had been lying to itself. No one laughed. No one said, "Lucky guess." The sheriff backed up slow and raised his hand like he was stopping traffic in a school zone and shouted for sawhorses, for cones, for chain. He didn't take his eyes off the boy. The men from the red truck didn't wait to argue. They pulled away without looking at anyone. The boy turned, and the whole town moved with him without meaning to. He led us to the culvert and pointed to the place where the bank had bitten in last time and told the mothers to get their kids back. 3 steps, then 4, and they obeyed him like he'd been their teacher since kindergarten. He told the store to bring out the old rope in the back and the men to tie it the way you tie a calf when you don't want to hurt it. He told the teenager with the phone to put it down and help with the knots. He told us how to stand. He told us where to look. He told us the water story. I felt something old and tight in my chest loosen like a knot that had been there since the day I folded a letter and hid it under ribbons. The man stood beside me, close enough that I could feel his breath when he finally spoke. "You asked if he was mine," he said, not looking at me. "He isn't. He belongs to whoever listens. I didn't deliver him. I delivered his message." He handed the sheriff a torn envelope with a company logo and a contract inside that said, "Evaluation in one place and transfer of custody in another." The sheriff read it with his mouth getting tighter and then looked at me like the ground under my feet had just been proven sound. The boy walked back to me through a hush. He put his small hand in mine like we were finishing a dance we'd started weeks before. He lifted his face and spoke so soft I had to bend toward him. "He says you didn't leave him," he said. "He says you kept the cap. He says when the light hits it, it looks like morning. He says you can say his name out loud now." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My mouth opened, and the name, first and middle, the way I had written it and never said, came out whole, and the sound of it broke me open without breaking me down. I cried with my whole body, not quiet, not pretty. The town watched and nobody looked away. The boy leaned his forehead to mine like a blessing. "He knows," he said. "He knows you kept him." People were crying without knowing why. Even the men who don't cry had their hands to their mouths. The sheriff took off his hat for the second time and didn't put it back on. Someone started to clap and stopped because it wasn't that kind of truth. It was the kind that makes you go home and sit in your kitchen and say thank you to the air. If your heart is pounding right now because you recognize this, because something in you just stood up and said yes, subscribe. This is where I tell the truth about what happens when the world shows us its hidden side and about the quiet laws that keep us when nothing else does. We walked back to town like people walking out of a church after a funeral that turned into a birth. They closed the bridge. They moved the bus route. They told the county they were wrong and didn't care if it cost. The red truck didn't come back. The man left after dark with his jaw set and his shoulders lighter than they'd been, and no one tried to stop him. The boy stood in my doorway one more time, hugged me like before, and said, "You saved us," and then added, like a secret for just me, "You saved them too," and nodded toward the town. I keep trying to tell myself I imagined it, that no child said my lost boy's name out loud in front of the whole county, that no river told a skinny kid its plans, that no bridge confessed. I keep trying and failing. My voice shakes when I say it. This could not have happened, not the way it did, and yet I saw it. I stood there and watched the impossible walk into the middle of Main Street and become real. I will never be the same, and neither will this town. If you believe in a special bond between a person and fate, right, we are not alone in this world.